The year was 1972. In America, Ms. Magazine, the first national magazine to tackle feminist issues, was on the newsstands. Contraception was now legal for unmarried couples. Roe v. Wade was before the courts. Sweden became the first country in the world to allow gender reassignment. Alex Comfort's how-to guide, The Joy of Sex, was on store bookshelves. And the hardcore pornographic film Deep Throat, which Ralph Blumenthal of the New York Times dubbed porno chic, was released into theaters. Welcome to Prettium Podcast. For the next few episodes of my ongoing series on the films of John Hughes, both made and unmade, I'll be looking at The Joy of Sex and its eventual adaptation into the 1984 film by the same name, without Hughes's involvement. As this movie has an unusually long history, I'll be breaking up the series into a few parts. If you're only interested in John Hughes's contributions, I'll be covering his involvement in the next part of the series. Now, before I get too far into the episode, there will be some explicit content that may not be appropriate for all listeners. Now that that's out of the way, let's get back to June 12th, 1972. When Deep Throat was in theaters, The Joy of Sex was on the shelves, and America was in the midst of a sexual liberation movement. According to a study conducted the following year, 1973, funded by the Playboy Foundation, in the quarter century since Dr. Albert Kinsey made his celebrated census of American sexual behavior, there have been dramatic increases in the frequency with which most Americans engage in various sexual activities, and in the number of persons who include formerly rare or forbidden techniques in their sexual repertoire. Premarital sex has become both acceptable and widespread, and the change is especially notable in females. And oral sex is far more widely used than it used to be. The article goes on to describe how else the sexual landscape of the 70s had changed, but no piece of popular media defined the moment more than Deep Throat, a full-length XXX feature by director Gerard Damiano. Deep Throat was a surprising crossover hit. Johnny Carson mentioned it on The Tonight Show, and even Barbara Walters has publicly admitted to seeing the film. It became the kind of film you could take a date to. Roger Ebert reviewed it in an early column a couple of days after the police raided the theater. The police, alas, neglected to obtain the necessary papers before making their raid, and so a federal judge ruled on Saturday that the town could continue to show Deep Throat. I exercised my constitutional right to see the movie on Sunday afternoon. Mike Nichols told Truman Capote he shouldn't miss it, and then the word just sort of got around. This is the first stag film to see with a date. There were a lot of couples in the audience Sunday afternoon. Most of them, I thought, left the theater looking a little grim. It's all very well and good for Linda Lovelace, the star of the movie, to advocate sexual freedom, but the energy she brings to her role is less awesome than discouraging. If you have to work this hard at sexual freedom, maybe it isn't worth the effort. But cinemagoers, they did make the effort. Deep Throat went on to make a record $3 million in its first 6 months of release, increasing to $25 million by 1975, demonstrating the public's interest in films about subjects that 5 or 10 years earlier would have been taboo. Deep Throat wasn't an anomaly. Thanks to innovations like Panavision's Panaflex 35mm camera, a lightweight and affordable camera, the cinematography in adult films was far superior to those shot only 10 years prior, ushering in an era of pornographic classics which would include Behind the Green Door, the opening of Misty Beethoven, and Damiano's follow-up, The Devil and Miss Jones, which was one of the top-grossing films of 1973. Major studios had also been flirting with pornography, albeit soft-core, with films like Last Tango in Paris and Emmanuelle, which both received an X rating. In fact, in 1976, 60 films received an X rating. Roughly 12% of all that CARA, the Classification and Rating Administration, reviewed that year. A number which is far more impressive when you consider that the X rating is the only rating that can be self-applied. And pornographic films did not submit their films for review. Theaters in many major cities were suddenly willing to play adult films like Deep Throat, and across the country, adult bookstores were popping up to provide magazines and toys. And for those unaccustomed with their newfound sexual freedom, there was a book that could help. Published in 1972 by Simon & Schuster, The Joy of Sex, A Gourmet Guide to Lovemaking, was a how-to guide and unanxious account of the full repertoire of humans' heterosexuality, written by Alex Comfort, a physician, novelist, poet, and all-around hippie. Claire Rayner, writing for The Guardian in 2000, sums up how many felt about the book. That it was a good book is undoubted. Comfort couldn't have written bad English if he tried, and his erudition laced the text to make it worth reading, even if you weren't in search of the perfect orgasm. It was also good because of what it did for so many people's sex lives. Comfort gave his readers permission to regard sex as a normal occupation and a perfectly respectable interest. While Joy of Sex did promote the idea that sex should be fun for women, in retrospect, it also encouraged women to be helpless, accept aggression, and generally reinforced the idea that women should be in a subservient position to the men in their life.
Oh, Dr. Young, how could I ever repay you? You've saved my life. I'm a fulfilled woman. I've heard the bells at last. Oh, Dr. Young, marry me. I want to be your slave.
Linda, I can't marry you.
What do you mean you can't marry me?
Well, my nurse, she won't let me. Besides, how much of deep throat do you think I can take?
Oh, no. You're not getting off that easy. You've shown me the way, and now you want to throw me out on the street? To go from one man to another? What, are you crazy? It's all your fault. Don't you understand? I need it. I need love.
Calm down. Listen, I'm not throwing you out. You're going to find your love and find your happiness. In the meantime, you can come to work for me here in the office and make some house calls.
I don't understand.
Well, you don't have... Well, that is, I'll make you a physiotherapist.
I don't know anything about physio...
I'll teach you.
Would you really, Dr. Young? Oh, Dr. Young, when can we start?
Well, right now, if you like.
Oh, the sooner the better. Will I need anything?
Oh, just a uniform.
No equipment?
Oh, Linda, you were born with all the equipment you'll ever need.
Oh, Dr. Young.
Jane Juffer, in her book At Home with Pornography, Women, Sex, and Everyday Life, compares the similarities between Deep Throat and The Joy of Sex. Both Deep Throat and The Joy of Sex indicate what, for many women, was wrong with the so-called sexual revolution. The conceit of Deep Throat was that Linda Lovelace's clitoris was located at the back of her throat, which meant that the only way for her to achieve orgasm was through deep throat fellatio. In this manner, the film recognized female pleasure as different from male pleasure, yet, at the same time, brought the two together in a manner that obviously continued to valorize the phallus. Similarly, The Joy of Sex discusses in various of its dictionary entry sections the importance of clitoral stimulation, but continually prioritizes the phallus. The former American Broadcasting Company president Tom Moore probably wasn't thinking of any of that when in December of 1975, or thereabouts, his company Tomorrow Entertainment optioned The Joy of Sex. It seemed like a great idea. In fact, it was a great idea. Joy was a huge bestseller and continued to be so long after 1975. By the early 80s, it had sold more than 7 million copies and remained on the New York Times bestseller list for a decade. Name recognition alone all but guaranteed a commercial hit, and Moore promised that the movie would faithfully render the style and content of the book. There were many that believed that a merger between the adult film industry and the major studios was inevitable. Paramount was already renting out their sound stages for porn shoots. However, the timing wasn't right. Backlash among the conservative public had continued to put negative pressure on adult films and publications since June 21, 1973, when the U.S. Supreme Court handed down a decision on Miller v. California that set out guidelines that would allow individual states to ban works they deemed obscene. An editorial in Playboy's October 1973 issue reads as follows: "The greatest harm done by the Supreme Court's obscenity decisions will not be that the people will lose access to hardcore pornography, although we believe that such access is, despite these decisions, a constitutional right. More serious is the restricting effect the decisions will have on the arts and the media of entertainment and information." Michigan Attorney General Frank J. Kelly was quick to warn, quote, "This really sets us back in the dark ages. Now prosecuting attorneys in every county and state will be grandstanding, and every jury and every little community will have a crack at each new book, play, and movie." End quote. Sheriffs, police chiefs, district attorneys, and other public guardians are already moving against works that by no stretch of the imagination can be called hardcore pornography. The fallout from the Supreme Court's decision would eventually all but remove explicit pornography from the mainstream for at least the next 20 years, until the internet came along. And while there's no further record of Tomorrow Entertainment's efforts and involvement with The Joy of Sex, after 2 years, the rights seem to have reverted back to the author. And then something happened that made The Joy of Sex a viable property again. The VCR, or video cassette recorder, which first hit the market in November of 1975, started gaining traction.
Marty, shh, you'll scare the fish.
But we're missing the big football game.
Relax, my VHS home video recorder is taping it right now.
Terrific.
Watch.
Terrific. But suppose it's over 3 hours.
Relax, Panasonic VHS tapes up to 4 hours of sports, movie specials on one cassette.
Wow. This VHS is for me. We caught the whole game.
Best catch of the day.
Yeah.
VHS, the 4-hour system from Panasonic and other leading companies.
In December 1977, George Atkinson opened the video station on Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles after purchasing a single cassette on both VHS and Betamax of 50 films licensed by 20th Century Fox, including Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, Hello Dolly, Patton, The French Connection, and The Sound of Music, and made them available for rental and sale. Interestingly, when Tom Moore first acquired Joy, the book's author Alex Comfort suggested a plot based on this new VCR technology. A romantic comedy about a 40-ish couple whose sex life goes stale and who find a copy of Joy, decide to reenact the positions on tape, then spend the rest of the movie trying to retrieve it. By the following summer, 1978, Paramount Pictures acquired the rights under the guidance of studio head and television-trained Barry Diller and his team of killer Dillers, comprised of Michael Eisner, Jeffrey Katzenberg, Don Steele, and Don Simpson, who would all one day go on to head studios of their own. It was production vice president and former film agent Nancy Harden who was first tasked with Joy, and she quickly tapped up-and-coming writers to tackle the project. Among the first to be asked to write the script were actor Charles Grodin and actor-comedian Dudley Moore. Dudley Moore had recently made a strong impression as Stanley Tibbets, a kink-obsessed would-be ladies' man, in his first American film, Foul Play, alongside Goldie Hawn, Chevy Chase, and Burgess Meredith. Moore had moved to Hollywood from the UK, where he was also known as a film composer and mostly for his comedic work with Peter Cook as Derek and Clyde. Paramount at that time wanted me to write The Joy of Sex for the screen. I said I can't write sketches, but that I'd write a story. I wrote a story much like the film 10. I was very keen to express myself in that way, and then, instead of doing Joy of Sex, I did 10. 10, written by Blake Edwards, not Moore, was about a 42-year-old composer obsessed with a young bride played by Bo Derek. The title 10, referring to Bo Derek's beauty, was a new term, popularized after the first Perfect 10 gymnastics score was awarded to Nadia Comaneci at the 1976 Olympics. 10 went on to be one of the top-grossing films of the year, just behind Alien, Apocalypse Now, and Kramer vs. Kramer. With Moore no longer interested in the project, attention turned back to Charles Grodin, who, when first asked to write the script, had refused. He recounted this moment in his biography, It Would Be So Nice If You Weren't Here, saying to Hardin, "If I were going to write an original movie, why be burdened with having to call it The Joy of Sex?" She repeated that the studio considered the title to be a big advantage, but that the movie could be anything. I thanked her for her interest, but said no thanks. A few weeks later, Grodin was more receptive. He had read an interview with ex-Paramount studio head Robert Evans, who had the biggest house and the most beautiful wife, but he conducted the interview while confined to a special bed for a back condition. Grodin had an idea, and in a meeting with Nancy Hardin and head of production Michael Eisner, he pitched it. What if I write a movie about a studio that buys a famous title of a sex manual and doesn't know what to do with it? Michael and Nancy stared at me, wondering at least for a moment, I think, if an insult was in the air. The head of the studio decides it should have something to do with love and goes out and gets a writer and director to help him make it. As the story unfolds, we see that these three people are trying to make a great movie about love while their own love lives are falling apart. There would also be a subplot that would deal with all the physical ailments that they were coping with due to the stress of their own lives and the demands of trying to make a movie. As I told the story, Michael and Nancy at first watched me with quizzical interest. Soon they were smiling, and by the time I finished, they enthusiastically told me to go and write it. Contracts were drawn that arranged for me to direct and star in it as well. In other words, to make my own movie. Grodin spent the next 4 months writing, and felt that the screenplay had turned out far better than he envisioned it when he finally sent the finished script off to Hardin. But Paramount passed on the completed script and put it into turnaround, an industry term where the production costs are written off as a loss and the project could be resold. They returned the script to Grodin, keeping only the title. I was told the script had been read by Don Simpson, a senior executive at the studio, who later left to produce Flashdance and Top Gun, not to mention Beverly Hills Cop 1 and 2. Simpson, who hadn't been at the meeting in which I described the story, had only made one comment that got back to me. Everybody gets sick in this movie. And here's where the story diverges. Paramount would keep the Joy of Sex name and try to make its own film, and Charles Grodin would go off on his own. Though it could no longer be titled The Joy of Sex, Charles Grodin would eventually get to make his film. Now, shopping the script around his dreamers, Grodin met with Frank Price, the head of Columbia Pictures, who passed, citing reasons similar to Paramount, and then Warner Brothers, Orion Pictures, and MGM, they all passed on the project. For the next few years, Grodin attempted to finance the film independently, and when that failed, he started making house calls, showing up at the offices of Sherry Lansing at 20th Century Fox and Ned Tannen, who was then the head of Universal. Everyone passed. After 5 years of failed attempts, Grodin met Bill Asher, a veteran television director, during a stage production of Charlie's Aunt. Asher had been in the business since 1952, and he felt that if the actors deferred their salaries, he and Grodin could get the movie made for $2.5 million. Frank Yablans, studio head at MGM, after reading the script and being made acutely aware of the budget, agreed to distribute the film. The film's stars, Steve Martin, Gilda Radner, Penny Marshall, and Tyne Daly, all agreed to defer their salaries, and when Peter Falk, who'd long been attached to the script, was unavailable, Walter Matthau stepped in at half his normal salary, $1 million, to make the picture.
We're going to make Love and Sex. People want to see it. We have to decide what it is, make it, and show it to them. And I think we can make something that is about something here. Freddie, will you put that book down, please, and concentrate? We are not going to do an X-rated picture with positions.
On May 3rd, 1985, MGM, who'd initially refused to release the film, citing problems with quality, granted Dreamers, now retitled Movers and Shakers, a limited release, hoping to someday recoup its inevitable losses on foreign sales and video cassette. Marilyn Arricchio, writing for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. The terrible issue that Grodin addresses in Movers and Shakers is simply the business of making movies in Hollywood. Not the art of making movies, but the business of deals based on market research, consumer trends, audience age, and maybe a catchy title. Walter Matthau stars as Joe Mulholland, the head of production for a major studio. His best friend, a producer named Saul, has spent his life dreaming about great movies. His last project was to be a dinosaur picture, but after spending $1 million on the dinosaur, Saul becomes gravely ill. His last wish is for Joe to make a movie based on the title of a sex manual, Love and Sex. He wants it to be a movie about something, and since Joe is a man of his word, he sets out to develop the project without having the faintest thread of a plot. Though Grodin's intentions are honorable, Movers and Shakers may be a little too inside for mass consumption.
Does anyone have any thoughts?
Joe. We're asking ourselves, what is Love and Sex without positions?
I know what we're asking, Arnie. I don't know what we're answering.
Despite its impressive cast, Movers and Shakers brought in only a meager $372,438 at the box office. And while Movers and Shakers did see release on VHS, it is yet to see a DVD or digital release. Deep Throat, on the other hand, is readily available in all formats. Next time on Pretty in Podcast, I'll pick up the story from where Grodin's script left off in 1978, when it would eventually land in the hands of the National Lampoon. For more on the making of Deep Throat, check out the 2005 documentary, Inside Deep Throat, by Fenton Bailey and Randy Barbado. Pretty in Podcast is written, produced, and performed by 517, which again, it's my real name. Theme music is by Brad Davis of Fresh Snow, with incidental music by Chris Doro. You can look up Pretty in Podcast on Facebook and Twitter. There are show notes at prettyinpodcast.com, and subscribe and rate on iTunes.
Joe, I have something for you.
What? Wait a minute. Let me get that.
One of the nurses, as a joke, I guess, gives me this.
Love and Sex?
You heard of it?
Of course, the sex manual.
Everyone's heard of it. You know how many copies it sold?
No?
4 million. You know why it sold that much?
People like sex manuals.
A lot of sex manuals, not much different from this one. This one's got drawings in. This one sold 4 Take it.
Wow.
It's the title, Joe. It's the words. Love in sex. Everyone was interested in those words. Love and sex. By the title, Joe.
Right.
And make something that's about something.